Dear friends, welcome to this week's virtual drasha. This week we have the incredible privilege of Parshas Vayera. And the parsha opens up 3 days after Avram Avinu underwent circumcision. Remember again, the end of last week's parsha, Avram Avinu accepted upon himself the mitzvah of bris milah and an advanced age. 3 days later, Avram Avinu is in the midst of his recovery, and the Torah says, Vayera elav Hashem be'elonei mamrei, v'hu yoshev pesach al kechom hayom. Parak Yud Ches Pasuk Aleph, chapter 18, verse 1. Avram Avinu is sitting outside his tent, by the entrance of his tent, kechom hayom, the heat of the day, and Hashem appears to him. Why did Hashem appear to him? So the Gemara explains, to do bikur cholim, to visit the sick. And then the Torah launches into a very interesting story. Avram Avinu is sitting by the tent, and he's looking around. He lifts his eyes, and he sees 3 men standing in the distance. What does he do? Vayaretz likrasam. This elderly man who is recovering from bris milah, from circumcision, runs out from his tent, middle of the day, heat of the day, to go and to greet these individuals. Of course, we know they're not regular individuals, they're malach and angels dispatched by HaKadosh Baruch Hu for a variety of different missions. And Avram Avinu invites them into his home. Again, this was exceptionally, paradigmatically Abrahamic. Avram Avinu was all about chesed. And one of the ways in which he really personified this midah of chesed, achnasas archim, hospitality. Avram Avinu's tent was open on all 4 sides because Avram Avinu understood, extend basic human kindness to another individual and they will be receptive to your spiritual messages as well. And it's interesting to note that the Torah goes into incredible detail regarding this story, right? It's fascinating. Again, we're told Avram Avinu was sitting at the entranceway of the tent. It's hot outside. He's looking around. He sees 3 men. He runs after the men. He invites them in. Not only that, but then the Torah goes through the whole menu. He goes to Sarah. Sarah, quick, make bread. Yishmael, slaughter animals. And then the Torah, in fact, tells us about when he brings the food to the guests, to the malachim. And the Torah says, Vayikach chema v'chalav u'ben habakar. He brought butter and milk and the meat, asher asa, vayitein lefneim, he placed everything before them, v'omed aleim tachas ha'etz vayochelu, and he's standing over them and they ate it. And the obvious question is, why is the Torah going into such incredible detail regarding this story? I mean, don't get me wrong. It's interesting and it's fascinating, and I got it. The point over here is these malachim were coming because each of them had a dramatic mission to execute, right? So one of them had to announce the birth of Yitzchak. One of them was to destroy stone. One of them was to save Lot. So obviously, again, this is a build-up to what's about to occur afterwards. But so much time, so many details regarding this story of hachnasas orchim, of hospitality. Again, we're here, Avram Avinu sitting, he's looking, he's running, he's bringing them in, the whole menu, ordering of the menu, the bringing out of the menu. Why all of these details regarding this story of hachnasas orchim, of hospitality? And the Gemara says something very beautiful, a famous Gemara, the Gemara Masechus Shabbos, Daf Kuf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph 127a. And the Gemara says, Amar Yehuda Marav, Gidola hachnasas archim, yoser, me'akbalas, Gidola hachnasas archim, yoser me'akbalas penei hashchina. So the Gemara says over here, it's actually Gemara in Shabbos and in Maseches Shavuos, that hachnasas archim, hospitality, is yoser, is even greater than receiving the divine countenance. You hear this? Gedola hachnasas archim, having people in your home, hospitality, is even a greater mitzvah, even a greater spiritual accomplishment than receiving the divine presence. Now, where does the Gemara get this from? So the Gemara understands, because remember, at the beginning of the parasha, Avram Avinu is sitting talking with Hashem. And then when Avram sees the opportunity for hospitality, he runs out. So, literally, Avram Avinu puts HaKadosh Baruch Hu kiviyachal on hold. He says, here, God, thank you for coming. Just stay right here. I'll be right back. And he runs out to greet 3 strangers. So the Gemara says, you see from here that obviously, welcoming guests, hospitality is even greater than receiving the divine countenance. And it sounds so beautiful, but it doesn't really seem to make sense. Really? Everything we do is to create a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, mitzvos are not an ends, they're a means. Every single thing we do in our spiritual lives is for one purpose and one purpose only, to create a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Every mitzvah is a building block in the fabric of that relationship. That's the goal. The goal is hakbalas penei hashchina. The goal is to receive Hashem, to have a relationship with Hashem. David HaMelech says, Achos sha'alti me'es Hashem. Hashem, I have one request. Shifti beveis Hashem kol yimei chayai. I want to dwell in your house relationship. So how does the Gemara say The hospitality, right? Having guests in your home is greater than receiving the divine countenance. The whole goal of hospitality, the whole goal of every chesed, ben adam l'chavero, ben adam l'makom, our interpersonal mitzvahs, our mitzvahs between us and God, are all to build relationship. So what does the Gemara mean? How do you understand it? And there's an incredibly beautiful insight by the Divrei Bina. The Divrei Bina was the Vayera Rebbe, Rav Yitzchak Yaakov Horowitz, who lived from 1766 to 1813. And the Divrei Bina says something incredibly beautiful. He says, in general, when you give something to someone else, by definition, you no longer have it, right? So if I have a piece of cake and I decide to be a nice guy and give you my piece of cake, you have it, I don't. That's the way it normally works in the material world. There's a finite object, a finite item, and again, there's one of it, there's two of it, whatever number it is, and if I give you the whole, half, whatever I give you, there is, by definition, less for me. The Divrei Bina, the Vayera Rebbe says, interestingly enough, there's one exception to that in the physical world. What's the one exception? The Rebbe says, a nursing mother. A nursing mother. That how does it work with a nursing mother? If the mother doesn't feed her child, then the milk supply dries up. But the more the mother nurses, ultimately, again, the more milk her body produces. And says the Vayera Rebbe something amazing. He says, if you notice, the first form of sustenance that we have in this world is mother's milk. That's the first form of sustenance, right? Before a baby begins to eat anything else. Ultimately, even like in today's age, it's incredible, right? Maybe this formula, there's this, that, but even so, before any of that, right? They're always going to try to see, could the mother nurse her child? The first form of sustenance. And the Divrei Bina, the Vayera Rebbe says something so beautiful. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants our first lesson to be in this world, that the more you give, the more you get. Human nature always tells us that the more we give, the less we have. And therefore, the first lesson that literally as babies we ingest in this world, the message of a mother's milk is the more you give, the more you get. The more I'm willing to do for the other, the more I'm willing to give to the other. It's true. Perhaps in the moment now, there's less for me. But in the grand scheme of things, in the big picture, the more I'm willing to do and give for you, the more ultimately, again, I will receive from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this lesson, says the Vayera Rebbe, is so important. You ever wonder to yourself, what's the first chinuch lesson that a child receives when it comes into this world? So we often like to think, it's Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. But Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe is something that a parent teaches a child when a child is a little bit older, at least able to say the words, Moshe Rabbeinu gave us the Torah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Beautiful. That's not the first lesson, says the Vayera Rebbe. The first lesson that a baby learns, the first nugget of Yiddish chinuch, of Jewish education, that every single infant, it's not just Jewish, it's like humanity education, is the lesson of the mother's milk. The more you give, the more you get. The mother sees it, the baby sees it, or at least understands it on some level, and this is the first building block of chinuch. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Vayera Rebbe says, that the Rebbe Shalom conveys to us in this world. And ultimately, again, the Rebbe says something so beautiful. He says, this is why Avram Avinu ultimately, again, began with milk. If you notice, by the way, in the lashon of the pasuk, so the pasuk says, "Vayikach chama v'chalav uben abakar." He gave them butter, milk, dairy products, ultimately, again, and then the meat. Of course, it could very well be that Avram Avinu was makbid on halacha also, so he didn't want to give milk and meat together. Okay, but on a more like ruchni level, Avram Avinu first gives them the milk. Almost as if to say to them, Chavra, don't worry. Maybe you're going to feel a little bit strange about eating my food. That if you eat my food, I'm going to have less. Armina says, that's not how it works. Let me teach you the lesson of the milk. Let me teach you the lesson of the mother's milk. The more you give, ultimately, again, the more you get. And the Rebbe says something so beautiful. He says, that's the pshat in the Gemara. He says, we're reading the Gemara wrong. We'll read the Gemara as Gidola Hachnasas Archim Yoser Me'akbalas B'nei Shechina. So we read it as Hachnasas Archim. Hospitality is greater than receiving the divine countenance, the divine presence. The Rebbe says that's not how to read it. Rather, again, you have to go ahead and put a comma a little bit differently. Where Gidola Hachnasas Archim. Why is Hachnasas Archim so great? Yoser. Because the more you give, the more you get. the more you're willing to be there for the other, the more you will receive from the Ribono Shel Olam. The more you're willing to put yourself out there for the other, to extend yourself for the other, the more you will have. Again, often our finite level of human comprehension and understanding says, well, again, there's a finite amount of stuff, finite amount of money, finite amount of food, finite amount of time, finite amount of koach. And if I'm giving it to you, by definition, I don't have it. But that's not the way it works. Kadach nasas archim. Do you know why opening your home and opening your life to another Jew is so incredibly important? Yoser, like the mother's milk, the more you give, Yoser, the more you will get. And where else do we see this modeled? Me'akbalos Penei Hashchina. The other place we see this modeled, ultimately, again, the paradigmatic representation of this, is our relationship with Hashem. Because the way it works with the Kadosh Baruch Hu is, the more I'm willing to put into the relationship, ultimately, again, the more I will get out. Not to go ahead and make our relationship with Kadosh Baruch Hu like a quid pro quo. That's not what it's saying. But at the end of the day, to recognize that, Yiddishkeit demands self-sacrifice. That's right. From the beginning of the day, right? The alarm goes off in the morning, and in that moment, I have that decision that seems like one of the most important decisions of the day. I could sleep, and that's for me, or I could get up. Whether I'm getting up to go to shir, I'm getting up to daven, whichever form of spiritual service. And in that moment, I'm like, one second, I need my sleep. And ultimately, again, if I give up my sleep, there's less for me. It's not true. Me'akbalos Penei Hashchina. The more you give to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the more ultimately, again, you will receive in return. In the short run, it may feel like I'm giving up a lot. Tzedakah. We work very hard for our money. We all work very hard for our money. And the notion sometimes of having to part with it, even if it's for a good cause, it's a little difficult. I don't know, maybe I'd like a little more for myself. I'd like to have a little bit more of a cushion. But again, understand, the more you give, the more you get. It's the lesson of the mother's milk, and it's the lesson ultimately, again, of Avram Avinu. That's the pshat. Godol hachnasas archim. Why is hachnasas archim great? Because hachnasas archim doesn't just represent having someone over for a meal. It represents doing for the other. The more you do for the other, Godol hachnasas archim, yoser, the more you will get from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And ultimately, where else do we see that? Me'akbalos Penei Hashchina. The more you're willing to give up of yourself, the more you're willing to sacrifice for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Rebbe Shalom says, I promise, I got you. And the more you give me, the more I will emirtz Hashem. Over time, in some way, somehow, give back to you. This was the lesson that Avram Avinu was teaching us, lesson that Chazal are teaching us, and a tremendous lesson. It was the guiding light principle of Avram Avinu's life. But I think something really profound for us to contemplate as well. Often Yiddishkeit demands of us to make sacrifices, whether they're sacrifices of our time, of our resources, of our Shabbos table. But just understand that whatever sacrifice, and I put that in quotations because it's not really a sacrifice, whatever you have to quote unquote give up of yourself in the different arenas of life, whether you're giving it up for your fellow Jew or whether you're giving up for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, always remember one word. Yoser. You will always get more than what you gave. Just like a mother teaches her infant child, the more I, the mother, give to you, my baby, the more I will have. Our first nugget, our first morsel of chinuch, of education in this world, is that nugget of education, that nugget of hashkafa that needs to follow us throughout our entire lives. The more we give to the other, the more we get. The more we give to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ultimately the more we get. The lesson of the mother's milk, the lesson of Yoser, the lesson of Avram Avinu. May we zochem Yiras Hashem to inculcate it within ourselves and use it as a guiding light principle in our relationship with one another, in our relationship with Hashem. Wishing everyone a good night of Shabbos and a beautiful Shabbos Kodesh.